Well, good morning. This morning, I want to talk about plural coding theory. It's my own theory that I've come up at developing on an old Canadian theory that seems to have been lost to history. I actually found the book, Psychology of Language, by Alan Paivio and Ian Begg, published in 81. There isn't even an ebook out there. You can find some editions sitting around. But here I am. I've developed they called it dual coding, right? They believe that visual and auditory, this is where I got my idea of reading a book and listening to it, causes greater retention. But what Paivio and Begg didn't understand or didn't outline is that if you have trouble reading, the listening makes your reading better. And I've talked about this, that I have leaned on audiobooks for most of my life, but it wasn't until I devoted, as an example, the last 3 years to listening to audiobooks each and every day, deeply engaging with them on my morning walks and on breaks and lunchtime, anytime that I have free, even getting up earlier in the morning so I can have an extra, half hour to an hour to listen to an audiobook. And when you have developed active listening skills, well, I can listen to an entire book. An example I'll give you. There's internal family systems. What did they call it? It's not a textbook, but it's designed for practitioners, for therapists, to get an idea of what internal family systems is about. It's about a 6.5 hour book. I finished it in 2 days on my walk. So, it took me probably a little over 3 hours. So today I want to talk about plural coding theory. This is something I've developed on top of his, and it's something that I've learned myself with my dyslexia and my different ways that I learn. I learn exponentially better by listening, but after having spent, like I said, a number of years doing this, now I learn very well in other ways as well. So it's what I call plural coding theory. Plural coding theory, beyond dual channels towards whole person learning. In the 70s, Alan Paivio proposed the now famous dual coding theory, asserting that our minds process information through two primary systems, one verbal and the other nonverbal, usually visual. This insight revolutionized how we understand memory and learning. Yet, as education, technology, and cognitive science have evolved, we are seeing that this dual model may no longer be sufficient. Enter what I call plural coding theory, a multimodal, dynamic approach to human learning, rooted in the understanding that we are more than our brains processing text and images. We are bodies, emotions, cultures, relationships, and histories. Imagination as well, don't forget. Plural coding doesn't reject dual coding. It builds on it, offering a more expansive framework for how we make meaning. What is plural coding theory? Plural coding theory holds that cognition and comprehension occur through multiple interacting modalities, not just two. These include verbal, spoken, written, and internalized language, visual, imagery, spatial patterns, and symbolic representations, auditory, sound, rhythm, tone, and prosody, kinesthetic, embodied experience, movement, and touch, emotional, affective, feelings as carriers of meaning and memory, social, contextual, learning influenced by cultural setting, dialogue and relationships, and temporal, sequencing, timing, and rhythm as cognitive anchors, and arguably even place and setting, but that fits within. I just want to point out a connection to how it's modular as well, right? Could be the healing of the person, right? In the sense of, like psychedelics, they use the setting and time and these sorts of ideas to contextualize that experience. And I argue that this plural coding can apply to almost every aspect of our life. But I digress. This theory suggests that true comprehension, deep learning, deep healing, deep understanding, deep insight, deep individuation or actualization occurs when these channels resonate together rather than operate in isolation. Think of it as a kind of cognitive polyphony, when multiple systems sing in harmony The melody of understanding becomes richer and more robust. But what made me build upon this idea, since I've been working on it a while, but build upon it, was engaging with Ian McGilchrist's left and right center of the brain, his ideas here. And not just to the master and his emissary. I found it to be a little wanting. It wasn't until I found his The Matter of Things, his new book, or he says it's supposed to be 3 books. But in it, I've seen what he's getting at, right? If you think about it, we have our autistic and our schizophrenics who are extremely left brain. The average population nowadays is going that way, very left brain. But then you have your neurodivergent on the other scale, right? Like me, that is so right concentric that I don't understand where they're missing their perspective, and they don't understand where I'm missing my perspective. And so, applied to Ian McGilchrist's hemisphere theory, this plural modal idea can be just like his, right? We have so many people that are left, right, combo, but imbalanced. It's not strictly a left heavy and a right heavy. Yes, there's extreme people who are left, extreme people who are right, but on average we are a blend, but we're an uneven, unbalanced, unindividuated whole, right? Because the whole, and I talked about this before, that McGilchrist has struggled to explain the right hemisphere without using the word whole, because the wholeness comes from when the left and right work together. So why it matters now. The need for a plural coding approach is more urgent than ever. The traditional education system often overemphasizes verbal processing, sidelining students who think better through movement, images, sound, and emotional resonance. So there's where my the influence of Temple Grandin and her thinking visually came, right? I found she was right on, but something wanting, just like the disengaged teen. I'm talking about this as well. Rebecca Winthrop puts forward an idea very similar to Jonathan Haidt's idea in The Anxious Generation. But here's where the mistake comes in. Not only does she try to categorize these kids into groups when we're all multimodal in our the way we operate in the world. We're not any one. There may be a few outliers that are, on the extreme end. Like I said, me with my right hemisphere view of the world, but that is so incredibly rare. We're actually a blend of all these things, right? And that's what I argue. We're a blend of visual and verbal, as Temple Grandin. We're a blend of all the different types of learners that Rebecca Winthrop gets into. We're a blend of these different disconnects that Wolf talks about, or even Paivio, he tends to, they flatten, as McGilchrist calls it, right? So the traditional education system overemphasizes verbal processing, right? Where I argue we need to find the kids and meet them where they are. They sideline students who not just think through movement, images, sound, and emotional resonance. What I'm arguing is the dual coding, my polymodal theory tells us that by limiting these children, right? Listen to this. By not allowing the children to speak or move, like that was with me when I worked in the bank. I used to get so much heck for walking and moving around. But as Nietzsche said, the only great ideas come when you're walking, right? And I myself just needed to get away from the computer. But also I never realized this movement opens up our learning process. So kids sitting quietly, silently, not moving. No wonder why they're having such a hard time grokking all of the information we're throwing at them, right? Plural coding meanwhile, much of our digital world still rests on binary delivery, visual plus text. Plural coding proposes a broader architecture of cognition, one that aligns with how we actually live, feel, and learn. But as I said, I go one step further and argue, can we see this in people who use standing desks? Or I saw someone writing their book on a laptop, walking on a treadmill. Does this not make sense to us that this could be this plural coding? that when you get more of our senses involved, you heighten not only the cognition, but the creativity. For instance, trauma-informed care increasingly shows that emotional and bodily awareness are essential to healing and memory. As Bessel van der Kolk writes in The Body Keeps the Score, trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It is also the imprint left by the experience in the mind, brain, and body. A child who struggles to read may not be slow. They may be coding the world kinesthetically or musically. Neurodiverse learners often excel when allowed to code information in the ways most natural to them. So let me just deepen that a little bit. So Nietzsche argues that his proto-trauma theory is that we're all operating with the world under the ressentiment, which means we're re-sentimenting, right? We're re-experiencing what happened to us in the past. So we're not present, we're not operating, we're not engaging our free will because we're reactive beasts. We're just reacting to someone or something in the present that happened to us in the past. We're not present, right? And so this idea of struggles who read slow, this is also developmental trauma. So kids who maybe parents were going through a divorce in grade 6, well, that kid might not have been concentrating as well. Or even like what I experienced yesterday. I didn't sleep so well. And I was on I wasn't taking my creatine and my methylene blue for the last couple of days. So yesterday, my brain fog was just incredible. But this can also just be sleep. This is why they recommend creatine for days that you were short on sleep, because it actually takes over that. Right? Again, another reason why I recommend books like Brain Energy, trauma theory, education, all this ties together. Because when you understand a lack of sleep, stress, or even just spikes in inflammation and cortisol can actually get in the way of us learning. But worse yet, that child, if he missed some stuff in grade 6, well, he's going to be behind forever. So that slow reader might simply be because they had a hard time concentrating in the formative year that we consider to be the year when we start teaching them to read or what have you, rather than meeting these kids where they are, right? I remember there's two quotes from teachers that have resonated with me. One teacher posits that kids are being traumatized by the way that we teach them, and another says that slow readers grow up to not like to read. So I argue looking at this plural coding could help 60 to 80% of the population. And there's my critique of both of those books, The Anxious Generation and The Disengaged Teen. Rebecca Winthrop is correct. It is about engagement, but it's not our teens. That's way too late. You need to begin by engaging the children, but even more so, engaging the parents. You got to get them engaged. We used to think it was some people learn by listening, some people learn by watching, some people learn by doing. That's wrong. We're all a blend of all that. But one thing that is universal, you can only truly, really learn and have that knowledge be integrated and last and stay if you're engaged. Right? We see this all the time. In fact, as an example, I've used Marianne Wolf's son who had dyslexia, but she didn't meet him where he was and teach him how to read. She pushed him into graphic arts. Well, Rebecca Winthrop, one of the foremost educators, she runs some educational institute at the Berkshire or whatever, super well known and respected. Yet she explains that, well, her son, she kept from having a cell phone until he was a teenager because she says this in an interview, she scared him so much, he was afraid. So he was able to fight the peer pressure. Everyone else had a cell phone. But listen to what she said. Did she teach him how to manage a cell phone? As I've told parents, don't take away the cell phone. Jonathan Haidt realized it's only going to make them pine for it, but they were going to just think about posting it. And Rebecca Winthrop said exactly this in the interview, that if you take it away, you can't give it to them at recess, because then they're just going to hold on to it till recess. But here's her mistake. So she finally gives the cell phone to her child when he's a teen, and he says he finds it very difficult. It's not willpower, right? And so does this host, Ethan Klein. says that he doesn't have the willpower to keep from using his phone. Jonathan McWhorter says that he has to force himself to read an hour a day, but he has to break it up into 2 because he can't keep away from his phone for longer than a half hour. And I wonder about that myself, whether he can. But this proves my point. If you take the phone away from the kids, well, they haven't developed the relationship. Then it can be very unhealthy. I argue, don't take away the phones, change the relationship. And I said, this is personal experience. When I was a banker, the phone was a tether. It even ruined a hunting trip one time because without cell phone and without connection to family, friends, in work, it was the first time in years that I had ever been disconnected from this. And it shocked me. It broke me in a lot of ways. I was like, wow, look at me. So from that moment on, I changed my relationship. I actually started using the BlackBerry's function to, shut it off after a certain time. And but then after leaving the bank, when I no longer needed internet, I just took the internet off my cell phone, right? Didn't get rid of the cell phone, just took the internet off. It took and put learning programs. And then in this 3-year period, I removed all social media. I made my entire life learning, researching, insight, perspectival knowing, you name it. That is beautiful because now I've added back some of the social media and I have no interest really in them. I really don't even, sometimes I even forget to post to help with sharing some of these ideas. I just can't be bothered, right? The only thing I use it for is for pre-existing family and friends. And that even, I'd much rather to just message them on an encrypted app like Signal or something, right? So by validating these forms of intelligence and perception, plural coding offers a more inclusive, ecological, and effective philosophy of learning at any age, mind you, right? I think I have proven that the reason why we thought that kids learn much better than adults is because, well, when's the last time you as an adult have actually gone and tried to learn something recently, right? Doctors, only 9% of your average North American doctor is keeping up to date on the current research, right? I was a banker for years, and I was the only person that took advantage of the money the bank would give you to take courses. The only person in all the branches, right? Of course, there was the mandatory courses that the bankers would take. What I'm saying is extra. Like I took my mandatory courses, financial planner, investment advisor, mutual fund, stock, Canadian securities course is what it used to be called, investment bankers, institute of, there's all these courses you can take. Not all of them are mandatory, but you can take all of them and then even more if you want. But no one was doing it. No one was taking it, right? So fast forward to today. Is it any wonder that we have multiple generations struggling to understand each other's grammar? This is what Marshall McLuhan warned us about. When you have adults who don't read, raise children who don't read, and so you have children and grandchildren. We're 2 and 3 generations into this thing where, as Marianne Wolf explained, at some point we stop reading to our kids. Then we expect them to read for themselves. No transition to listening. This is what I would argue. We should transition our kids from listening to us read to them, but also having them follow along. If you notice that, that's what we do. It's very much dual coding theory that has survived the way we read and interact with our kids when they're young. But then we forget that. We expect them to sit there silent and read a book rather than, as I say, listen and read the book. That's dual coding. But I go into it deeper. I go and walk. I stole this from Bessel van der Kolk. He argues that the rapid eye movement helps re-engage ourselves in the present. So I stole that and applied it to learning, right? So the way I was healing my trauma, I modified his rapid eye movement since I didn't have a therapist. So instead of having someone move their hands in front of my eyes and I follow it, what I do is when I found myself on my walks, this is before I started listening to audiobooks, and that allowed me to focus. But what I would do is when I was walking, when something traumatizing came up, I would look and consciously pay attention to what I was looking at and the ground and the world and the listening and feeling my feet hit the ground. That's Kankrama, Buddhist walking meditation. And what I never realized is I was developing this plural coding before I could even cognize this idea, before I even found the dual coding book of Paivio. Because what I realized is by walking, then I started listening to audiobooks. But what did I do? I wasn't just listening. I wasn't just walking and feeling that. But what I did to make the audiobooks resonate more is I would visualize the words being said in my mind. I would visualize them in my mind being written on a blackboard, which I found too distracting, all the noise and the dust. So I started visualizing a whiteboard. So all of the writing was being written on the whiteboard. And I wonder if I stole that from that really, really popular YouTube channel that explains, and I do enjoy it. There's quite a few of the videos that I would recommend to people if they wanted to understand complicated philosophical or linguistic concepts. That YouTube channel where he draws with whiteboards and the grease pencils. And I think it's a wonderful channel. And so I didn't even realize that I developed a plural coding matrix for learning already, listening to the audiobooks. I used to follow along with them, but now I used to, I don't even have to anymore. They just appear. But I used to consciously visualize the words in my head being written down. And so you're listening to the words, you're listening to your world, your body, you're walking, you're thinking, you're seeing. This is true polymodal learning, right? If you think about it, it's not just dual coding. It's not just sitting, reading, listening. That is beneficial. That's like the little Jewish boys that I've told you about, that they sit across from each other and read to each other and challenge each other. Kind of like the way Buddhist PhDs do. And this is where these ideas come, generically. But how? Because I have taught myself how to think, taught myself to be interdisciplinary. Because, well, what is our job as a human? It is to become interdisciplinary. It's to apply these plural coding ideas to all aspects of our lives, right? I've talked about this, our jobs, our lives, our relationships, our learning, our healing, our individuation. So if you're not reading, if you're not learning, if you're not thinking, if you're not writing, then you're not fully human. This is what I didn't realize. I used to give this story that Bart Ehrman, he's a well-known theologian. He teaches in university. Yet his way is he knows his students are going to come in not being able to write. Does he teach them how to write? No. He assigns them an essay and laughs at them. Then there's Jordan Peterson. Say what you like about him, but when he saw that these students were coming in unable to write, he developed a narrative program, teaching them how to write an essay, and then after, teaching them how to write about themselves. So where do we go from here? From theory to practice. Imagine a classroom where a lesson about the water cycle involves storytelling, verbal, diagrams and animation, visual, water, dance or movement game, kinesthetic, or I would argue just allow the kids to move, songs or rhythm-based chants, auditory, plus also that unison, that equanimity stuff I've talked about. Reflection on personal experiences with water, an emotional but also connective community in a sense. Open discussion or role play that's social, but that's also interactive and it's also imaginary. Time-based projects like growing a plant or measuring evaporation, that's temporal. But I go one step further. One of the hardest things for people to do is to see incremental growth. But that's a great idea. That I argue that we turn our school yards, all this wasted space, because I see it. I live by a school. They don't use it at all. Teach them about gardening, teach them about composting, right? So like growing a plant, like composting and seeing the full cycle. Talk about a wholeness, right? Not just teaching them about how a plant grows, but teaching them how a plant breathes, lives, but then also returns to the earth, composts, and becomes food for other plants. You get what I mean? So this isn't just more engaging, right? It's more than building on Rebecca Winthrop's idea, right? These kids aren't just disengaged. They don't know how to engage. It reflects how we're wired, not just kids, not just teens, but adults. Such teaching doesn't just teach about the water cycle. It codes the concept deeply into memory through multiple pathways. But as I've said before, Sherlock Holmes said, we learn these things so that we can improve the minor folds in the brain. by challenging something new, challenging something difficult. It makes the next challenge easier. And like lobsters and racehorses, if they lose over and over again, they will more likely lose again. So again, we're learning about ourselves. So if you succeed at learning something, the next time you're going to have more confidence, not just more ability, but more confidence. And this is what's funny. Jordan Peterson, I don't think, saw this interdisciplinary insight, right? He talks about his lobsters. I found from the movie, the book Seabiscuit, that, well, horse trainers know this to be true about horses as well. That once a lobster or a horse loses, especially repeatedly, they will actually demonstrate this and it will become part of who they are. So how plural coding builds on and surpasses other models. Plural coding incorporates the strengths of many existing frameworks. From Paivio's dual coding, it retains the insight that dual systems enrich memory. Paivio argued, quote, information coded in both verbal and nonverbal formats is more readily recalled, end quote. That's from Mental Representations, 1986. From Howard Gardner's Multiple Intelligences, it affirms diverse learner styles. Gardner stated, quote, it's not how smart you are that matters, but what really counts is how you are smart. Right? So again, I apologize. Quote, it's not how smart you are that matters. What really counts is how you are smart. End quote. That's Frames of Mind from 1983. From Richard Mayer's Multimedia Learning Theory, it echoes the call for multi-sensory engagement. Meyer emphasizes that, quote, people learn more deeply from words and pictures than words alone, end quote. Multimedia Learning, 2001. And from Embedded Cognition, it adds the layer of physical and affective grounding. As Lakoff and Johnson explain, quote, the mind is inherently embodied. Thought is mostly unconscious. Abstract concepts are largely metaphorical, end quote. Philosophy in the Flesh, 1999. From Temple Grandin, it supports visual and spatial cognition. Grandin reflects, quote, I think in pictures. Words are like a second language to me, end quote. Thinking in Pictures, 1995. From Antonio Damasio, it acknowledges emotion's role in decision-making and memory. Quote, we are not thinking machines that feel. We are feeling machines that think, end quote. Descartes' Era, 1994. From Lev Vygotsky, it affirms the centrality of cultural context. Quote, through others, we become ourselves, end quote. Mind in Society, 1978. And finally, from Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk, but from Peter Levine, somatic experience is central. Quote, trauma is a fact of life. It does not, however, have to be a life sentence, end quote. That's from Waking the Tiger, 1997. And I'll go one step further, and this is why I entitle my Substack, The Tragedy of Trauma, because it doesn't have to be a tragedy or a trauma. It can be an experience. And yet, so much of this story is traumatic and tragic. So what are the implications beyond the classroom? So in therapy, plural coding affirms the need for approaches that include bodywork, narrative, emotional processing, social connection, and then some, right? In design and user experience, it encourages richer interactions, ones that speak not just to the eyes and fingers, but to the whole person. In philosophy of mind, it points towards a post-computational, humanistic model of cognition that resists reductionism. So in conclusion, towards a more human way of knowing. We're not data processors. We are story makers, body feelers, and rhythm dwellers. The mind is not made of code. It's made of dance, pulse, metaphor. Plural coding seeks to restore that richness by acknowledging the multi-codes we use to learn and live and make meaning in the world. We move towards education, towards therapy, and towards human connection. That is more humane, more inclusive, and more transformative. It's time to stop thinking in binaries. The future is plural. To explore this further or collaborate on developing plural coding practices in education or healing, reach out or leave a comment below. Thank you very much for your time.